Setting up your AED Plus Trainer2 is easy. Here are the items that are shipped with your Trainer2. CPRD training pads, documentation, the Trainer2 with remote controller, and batteries. Remove the remote controller from the slot under the handle of the Trainer2. Locate the 4 D-cell and 2 AA batteries that shipped with your Trainer2. Slide the battery compartment door off of the remote controller and install the 2 AA batteries. Be sure the negative end of each battery contacts the large spring in each battery slot. Then replace the battery compartment door. To make certain the remote controller has power, push the big center button above the line on the remote controller, called the View Enter button, once. 2 green lights should come on and stay on for about 8 seconds, and then turn off. Now remove the battery compartment door of the Trainer2 and install the 4 D-cell batteries as indicated on the bottom of the battery compartment. Again, be sure the negative end of each pair of batteries contacts the large spring in each battery slot. Replace the battery compartment door. To make certain the Trainer2 has power, push the on-off button once. The red status indicator light should flash once, and then the green status indicator light should remain on. Now turn the unit off by pushing and holding down the on-off button once. These batteries will supply enough power to support about 100 hours of training. If the Trainer2 ever prompts you to change batteries, you should install new batteries sometime within the next hour of training. Continue your Trainer2 setup by removing the CPRD training pads that came with it. Open the box and remove the pads and training gels. Open the package and remove the pads. Attach the training gels to the CPRD training pads. Remove the lid from the Trainer2. Place the pads on the face of the unit and plug the pads into the Trainer2. And replace the lid. This completes the setup of your AED Plus Trainer2. There are a few basic things you should be familiar with when using your AED Plus Trainer2. The remote controller, like a television remote controller, is always on and ready for use. You don't have to turn it on or off. Unlike a television, however, you cannot use the remote controller to turn on the Trainer2. It must be turned on first by pushing the on-off button once. All lights will illuminate sequentially, and the green status indicator light will remain on. Unlike the clinical AED Plus, the AED Plus Trainer2 has no status window for a green check or red X. Instead, it has 2 status indicator lights. When the Trainer2 unit is on and ready to communicate, the green light will stay on. When both status lights are off, the Trainer2 unit has no power and communication with the remote controller is not possible. The Trainer2 unit will automatically turn itself off after 15 minutes of no activity. Whenever you put the Trainer2 into pause mode with the remote controller, the green light will flash continually. The other status indicator light is red. It reacts to all transmissions it detects from the remote controller. When it receives a command that is valid, it flashes once for about a second, and the Trainer2 unit will do what the command has called for. If it receives a command that is not valid, it will flash 3 times quickly, and the Trainer2 will not accept the command. If you attempt to transmit a command to the Trainer2, but the red light does not respond, the controller is either too far away or not pointed directly at the unit. The remote controller may not transmit beyond 30 feet. It also transmits into an area that is only 15 degrees to the left and right of the straight line direction in which it is pointed. A single remote controller can be used to control multiple Trainer2 units, but they must be 15 degrees apart to maintain separate control. Note that the face of the Trainer2 unit has a printed facsimile of the display screen found on a clinical AED Plus. This screen is the most important one a user of the AED Plus is likely to see. It shows the shock count, the time elapsed since the unit was turned on, the text that matches the voice prompt to push harder, and the bar gauge that moves up and down with each compression and shows the compression depth recommended by the American Heart Association. Users who want to practice real CPR help feedback for rate and depth of compressions using a clinical AED Plus should use the Travel Trainer in addition to the Trainer2. Notice the horizontal line on the remote controller. The buttons above this line are used to select and define the rescue scenario to be run. The buttons below this line are used to control the scenario once it begins to run. Always begin setting up a rescue scenario by pushing once on the big button in the center. Once you've selected and defined your scenario, push it a second time to transmit the scenario to the Trainer2. This button is called the View Enter button because the first time you push it, you can view the current scenario defined at the remote controller. The second time you push it, the remote controller transmits or enters your scenario settings to the Trainer2. You can be sure the scenario has been transmitted to the Trainer2 if it responds by flashing the red indicator light once. When you turn the remote controller on, the green lights will show you the current scenario setting for 8 seconds. While these lights are on, you can change scenario settings at the remote controller prior to transmission. Choose your scenario with the Scenario Selection button. Every time you push it, the green lights will indicate a change to a new scenario. Scenarios 2 through 5 are fixed. The paired icons next to each light indicate what the first and second heart analysis in each scenario will be. Scenario 2 will call for a shock on both the first and second analysis. Scenario 3 will call for no shock on the first analysis and then a shock on the second. Scenario 4 will call for a shock on the first analysis and then no shock on the second. Scenario 5 will call for no shock on both the first and the second analysis. The first scenario is not fixed but manual, which means you can call for a shock or no shock as you proceed through the rescue. The CPR metronome button to the right of the View Enter button determines whether CPR metronome beeping and prompting will be on if the light is lit or off if the light is not lit. The CPR metronome should be turned on whenever you are training with CPR D-pads. Turn it off whenever you are training with stat pads. This will cause the Trainer2 during the CPR interval to act like the clinical AED Plus with stat pads attached and say every 15 seconds,
"Continue CPR,"
instead of beeping and prompting push harder and good compressions. Now suppose you want to run a scenario that presents a successful rescue using CPR D-pads in which the first heart analysis advises a shock
flashing shock button.
and the second one calls for no shock because the victim has been resuscitated. Push the View Enter button once to put your remote controller in setup mode. Select Scenario 4 with the Scenario Selection button. Push the CPR metronome button once to turn on the CPR metronome used by the CPRD pads. The scenario is now set up, but in the remote controller only. Point the remote controller at the Trainer2 and push the View Enter button a second time to transmit the scenario to it. The red status indicator light will flash once to indicate that the new scenario has been communicated to and accepted by the Trainer2. This completes the scenario setup. Your Trainer2 will continue following this scenario until you transmit another one to it using a remote controller. Even if you turn the unit off and change batteries, when you turn it back on, it will follow this same scenario. To run a scenario, begin by pushing the on-off button to power up the Trainer2. The student starts the scenario by pushing the on-off button a second time. Once the scenario is running, the instructor can control the progress of the scenario by using the 6 buttons below the horizontal line on the remote controller. The bottom left button can be used to pause a scenario once it is running.
Check responsiveness. Call for
Push
help.
the pause button once to pause the scenario. Push it again, and the scenario will resume.
Pads to patient's bare chest.
The bottom right button can be used to stop a scenario that is running or paused. Push the stop button once to stop the scenario. Unlike pausing, stopping resets the scenario to the very beginning. If the student now pushes the Trainer2's on-off button,
Unit OK.
the scenario will restart from the very beginning.
Responsiveness. Call for help.
The 2 middle buttons can only be used during the CPR interval while the Trainer2 unit is beeping in a scenario with the CPR metronome on. Push the left button once to make the Trainer2 say,
Push harder.
push the right button once to make the Trainer2 say.
Good compressions.
Both middle buttons can be used at any time during the CPR interval,
Push harder.
but at other times,
Stop CPR. Don't touch patient.
these
Stand
buttons
by.
are invalid and their transmissions will be rejected by the Trainer2 unit.
Don't
And
touch
the red
patient.
light will flash
Stand by.
3 times quickly. The No Shock button on the top right is used to call for a result of no shock advised on the next heart analysis. It can only be used during a manual scenario and not during one of the 4 fixed scenarios. By default, in every manual scenario, the heart analysis
Don't touch patient. Analyzing.
will always advise a shock. Push the No Shock button once to force the next heart analysis to advise no shock.
No shock advised. Start CPR.
This button is unidirectional. Once you have called for no shock, you cannot override it to make the Trainer2 unit call for a shock. Once a heart analysis is over, however, the Trainer2 unit will automatically reset the next heart analysis to advise a shock. The top left button, the Pads button, is used to let the Trainer2 unit simulate when pads have been attached and are in contact with the patient's heart. In all scenarios, when the Trainer2 unit says,
Attach defib pads to patient's bare chest.
it will keep repeating this prompt
Don't touch patient. Analyzing.
until the Pads button is pushed once to simulate pads attachment
Don't touch patient. Analyzing.
and heart rhythm detection. The Pads button can also be used to indicate that a student has attached pads quickly, which will cause a jump to analysis.
Stay calm. Check responsiveness. Call for help. Don't touch patient. Analyzing. patient. Analyzing. Attach defib
During
pads
a
to
heart
patient
analysis,
bare chest.
you can push the pads button once to simulate a broken connection to the patient's heart.
Don't touch patient. Analyzing. Analysis halted. Check electrode
Push the
pad.
pads button a second time to simulate reconnection of the pads and detection of a heart rhythm.
Don't touch patient. Analyzing.
Now let's review a complete simulated rescue using the AED Plus Trainer2. The instructor sets up a manual scenario using CPR D-pads and transmits the scenario to the Trainer2. The student begins the scenario.
Unit okay. Stay calm. Check responsiveness.
You okay? You
Call
okay?
for help.
You, call for help.
Attach defib pads to patient's bare chest.
The instructor pauses the rescue to discuss the student's actions so far, and then resumes the scenario.
Attach defib pads to patient's bare chest. Don't touch patient. Analyzing. Don't touch patient. Analyzing. Shock advised. Don't touch patient. Press flashing shock button. Shock delivered. Start CPR.
The instructor determines that the student is not pushing deeply enough.
Push harder.
The instructor determines now that compressions are deep enough
Good compressions.
and that the scenario is complete and the class should move on to another scenario. This completes your AED Plus Trainer2 training video. If you have further questions, consult the operator's guide that came with your AED Plus Trainer2 or call ZOLL Technical Service.